What do you think about Gollum's nether region?
Welcome back to Nerd Legion. We continue with our deeply unpopular to everyone but us arc of Nerd Legion, where, you know, we thought, hey, we're getting a lot of success, too much success, some might say, with viewership.
Warcraft episode did too good.
The Warcraft episode was too good. Things that you guys knew and or liked, modern releases, and we said, what if we just tanked our viewership by doing every fantasy movie from the 1980s? And as you guys know, we're not going to be doing this every week. We're just doing it in weeks where there isn't something super interesting, because for us, and hopefully for you, if you start trying to watch these videos, it'll be a lot more fun than doing garbage TV that is coming out or films that are coming out right now. Now, that said, Doa, we actually do have a lot of stuff coming up this fall that will be back in the vein of the modern releases. But for the time being, here we are once again with a very popular, you know, we thought, hey, Rings of Power is out. The focus is back on Lord of the Rings. What if we did Return of the King? And you're thinking, wow, that really good movie that won Best Picture in the 2000s? No.
Like 15 Oscars, yeah.
The 1980s version of Return of the King, the animated musical version, because that's what the people really want to see and hear about. But I have to say, again, this was incredibly worth it, because this is wildly entertaining, possibly for the wrong reasons, like Hawk the Slayer. But I had so much more fun watching Hawk the Slayer and this than so many of the other things that we've done on Nerd Legion.
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, people are wrong if they think this show is for them. No, this show is for us. this show is for us to have fun talking about this stuff and entertain ourselves. So we just hope you come along for the ride. That's what it comes down to. But with this series, I think there is a lot of value in here. I think the people that you and I were talking about this earlier, and you said the people that watched it liked it, because you are right that this type of media, the 1980s fantasy genre, has so much that you just don't see anymore.
Oh, it's so fun.
There was a lot. First of all, there was a lot more risk taking. I don't think you would see a Return of the King musical these days. I'll just put that out there.
with 1960s folk music.
When Bilbo found that shiny ring in Gollum's cave of gloom, he never thought that it would turn into a ring of doom.
Yes, the only show I can think of that's currently being made that takes as many risks as this in the sci-fi fantasy genre is probably Star Trek: Strange New Worlds, which did have a musical episode in their last season. But that they seem like the only series that are willing to actually like try new things and like just have fun with the show, right? Where back in the 80s, there were no rules. There were no media juggernauts that had to keep these like shambling corpses of franchising stumbling forward, right? Crushing every original idea in their path. So you got to have great stuff like this. You got to have great stuff like Hawk the Slayer. There's a lot of things in the 80s to really admire from just sort of the perspective of, wow, they got to do whatever they wanted on this, and they just did it. And did it work? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but it was always entertaining. There's always entertainment there. And that's what I love about this series, is that no matter how good or bad something is, there is always just a level of entertainment that exists that is higher than the base level of entertainment in a lot of stuff coming out on streaming services right now.
Yeah. And I think the episode we did on Hawk the Slayer was also very fun. Shout out to our editor Adanion, who always does a great job. I thought it was especially funny the way he did the audition reads for us. It was very, very fun. So
Put the music
check it out
in there and everything. I love it.
Check it out. He's crushing it as well. So thank you guys. But we are going to continue this for now. Now, that said, guys, there is going to be a bunch of content coming up over the next couple of months that we really want to get to that is more modern. Obviously, like Dune Prophecy is coming out in November. Star Wars Skeleton Crew, which looks horrendous, is coming out in December. Arcane, of course, probably one of the things you want to hear, coming out in November. We'll also be tentatively looking at a couple of other shows. So Citadel Diana is an Amazon Prime show that's a sci-fi show that's coming out. Gundam Requiem for Vengeance, which is a CG Gundam show coming out on Netflix.
I'm quite excited about that one.
That's right. We got Secret Level. Yeah, we also have Secret Level coming up, which is a video game property TV anthology. So it contains like episodes based in the world of a bunch of different video games. That's coming up in December. And I think what's really exciting, and we will be doing this one for sure, is the anime version of Uzumaki, which is Junji Ito's very famous manga. And that got turned into, I did not see it, but what I heard was a very terrible live action film. But this is going to be
yeah, I forgot about that. I didn't see that either, but I remember people saying, now that you mentioned that, how bad it was. And so I never ended up watching it. Oh, now I kind of want to.
But we will be we will be doing Uzumaki, but we're gonna wait for all of the episodes to be released. So the last episode is going to be released right at the end of October. So we'll be hitting that at the end of October for you guys. I love Uzumaki, so I'm really excited about this. I haven't seen the first episode yet, which has been released, but the animation in the trailers looked really on point. It seems like they're really just stock following the way that the manga works, which is of course the correct decision to make. It is in black and white. So I'm very, very excited about that one. And we will be getting to that.
I love how there was this pause before you said correct decision, as you really wanted people to believe that the only way to adapt manga is black and white and just take it panel for panel. This is Monty and my take must be the take. I love it. There was such conviction.
I don't have opinions. I just have facts.
Yeah, that's a great quote. I feel like you probably said that before, though. It's probably out there. I'm sure that's on a world's broadcast somewhere or something. Well, anyway, so let's. So how about that Lord of the Rings film? We're not going to talk about that, because it wasn't even made by the same people that made this one. And I feel like when we're talking about the Return of the King animated movie, we have to begin with how this was made, right? We have to begin with how this came to be, because it's super weird. It's extremely strange.
Go for it.
I mean, there was a Rankin Bass. So Rankin Bass made the Return of the King animated film in 1980. Go back a few years. They made a Hobbit movie as well. After they made the Hobbit movie,
hold up. We have to describe who Rankin Bass is first. So Rankin Bass was an animation company that existed, in the 70s and 80s. They are very, very famous. You have probably seen, even if you have not seen their Tolkien adaptations, you are probably very familiar with them because they did that famous Frosty the Snowman from the 1960s, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. If you've seen these 60s animations, particularly at Christmas time, that is Rankin Bass, right?
The claymation stuff. Yeah. So this is not claymation. It's animated. It's a cartoon, right? But they did become very famous for those stop motion holiday ones, like you're talking about. Some other animated things as well. And then they wanted to tackle Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, as you did, and which was kind of interesting because at that point, remember, people really only knew The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings from the books. I know that sounds strange because we've had so many adaptations for the screen since then, in our lifetimes that have been made. But back then, this was really one of the first visual adaptations of the books that had been made. So I think there was a lot of anticipation. I think there was a lot of probably debate about how this should be done. So they made a Hobbit one. Rankin Bass, to me, is famous for how ugly they make all their characters. They are all hideous. Good guys, bad guys, guys in between. They're all hideous. The orc design shows up for some of the villains from Thundercats later on in the 80s. That's another Rankin Bass property, if you will. But but yeah, that was the first thing that stood out is everybody's ugly. It's like it's like if the people that did the video game, the Elder Scrolls video games, made a cartoon. Uh, that's how it would be because in those video games, everyone's ugly too. Um, but so they made The Hobbit, right? And it went okay. And then they were like, okay, what's next? Well, turns out what's next is not made by them at all. It's a Lord of the Rings, also animated film by a man, helmed by a man named Ralph Bakshi. It was very low budget. It was very poorly received. It had a lot of rotoscoped people, which basically means they took like actual footage of people and then kind of drew over it to do the cartoons. Uh, so it kind of had like people in very bad cosplay orc costumes, but kind of silhouetted except for the eyes. It looked very bad. The characters were even uglier than Rankin Bass characters, which is an achievement, I think. And it was very poorly received. It was so poorly received, in fact, that they didn't get to do the end of the story because their Lord of the Rings film only went up to the end of Two Towers. It was just Fellowship of the Ring and Two Towers. And so, naturally, what did Rankin Bass do? They said, well, rather than start over again and make our own Lord of the Rings film from the beginning, from Fellowship, let's just make a movie completely not associated with the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings, but yet picking up where his movie ended up, and we'll make Return of the King as a movie. And that's what they did. So it's really weird that this Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings movie was made. That was the first two books, and then independently, Rankin Bass got the rights for it and made the Return of the King one. And apparently they're packaged together now. You can buy like a box set with all three. So there's like it's like a disappointment sandwich, right? Where The Hobbit and Return of the King are pretty good, but in the middle you've got this like awful Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings animated film. So it's very strange, but that's kind of how it got to happen. And notably in the credits for this one, it says based on the original versions of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So in the title specifically that they have nothing to do with that Ralph Bakshi trash, except for the fact that they started their movie right where his left off. So there's kind of a connection, but they don't really want you to think about that too much. So there you go. It's weird.
That's really funny. So, guys, before we get into the meat of this, and there is just so much delicious meat to this film, we are going to talk about our sponsor for this week, which is, of course, Turtle Beach. This is, if you are wanting to listen to, in all of its glory, the musical Return of the King, we may recommend that you use some Turtle Beach headphones. They are renowned over the years for the quality of their audio. If you guys are wondering why we're not wearing them right now, I actually would be loving to wear these right now. But when we're doing podcasts, we actually do need a wired connection because we have to be able to hear our own voices. So I've been using these constantly when I have not been on the podcast because the wireless, they're much lighter weight than these headphones, and the wireless just works wonderfully. Also, guys, these are going to be the Stealth 600 Gen 2s, but they just released the Stealth 700 Gen 3s, actually. Sorry, these are the Stealth 600 Gen 3s, but they released the 700 Gen 3s. But these are really great. Not only are they super comfortable, super lightweight, they have insane battery life. It's 80 hours off of a single charge. They work via Bluetooth and they work via the USB wireless transmitter. So I've been using them for my PS5. I've been using it for my Switch. Works great with your phone. All you have to do is hit one button to change between the Bluetooth and the wireless modes. I've been using them to play Apex Legends on my PC, and you can definitely hear that they boosted the frequencies on like footsteps and other things. So they do give you a tactical advantage in game as well, I have found. So I am a big fan. I am a big fan of these, so you guys should check them out, or other products. By the way, Doa, did you know that they bought Rockcat, which is the gaming peripheral company?
Oh, I didn't.
So they
I didn't
also
know that.
have
That's a good buy.
Yeah, mice and they have mice and keyboards now,
Wow.
and they have flight sticks. And if you're a racing enthusiast, they have racing wheels. They've got basically everything. So Turtle Beach has everything you need as a gamer. So I've been enjoying them.
No, I'm a little bit more cultured of a man than Monty is here. So, usually when I decide I need to work from my laptop in a cafe or something like that, earbuds, frankly, just do not do it for me. There's still too much noise coming in. There's still too many people talking, oh, merger, stock options, business. I'm like, I don't want to hear that. I just want to hear my music while I write a little bit of fantasy, while I do a little bit of research on the next thing we're doing for Nerd Legion. And so something that goes over my ears and is comfy and it's light is perfect. So there you go.
Sound isolation also very good because these are closed back. So sound isolation very good on these. And you guys can get the ultimate immersive gaming experience with Turtle Beach today. For a limited time, head to turtlebeach.com and use code NL. It's an NL for Nerd Legion for 10% off your entire order. 10% off your entire order at turtlebeach.com with promo code NL. So buy yourself a new mouse. I actually love the Cone Air, which is the Rockcat mouse that they purchased. So I'm looking forward to actually having one mailed to myself right now. So there you go, guys.
I've used them over the years as well. Yeah, I found it very good for shooters. A Rockcat mouse I had in the past. Yeah.
So there you guys go. Thank you to Turtle Beach. So Noah, where would you like to begin with this fabulous production of Return of the King? It is deeply weird. There are some really funny elements to this. To set the stage though, guys, this kind of folk, if you guys aren't familiar, folk music was super popular, especially in the 60s. And the cast for this and the people they got were actually extremely well-known names. So Glenn Yarbrough, who is the what is it? The Bard of Gondor that they introduced.
The Minstrel of Gondor.
The Minstrel of Gondor.
You asked me how we were supposed to start, and my immediate thought was we have to. I would just go, well, let's let the Minstrel of Gondor sing us in, and then the camera pans away from us, and there's a guy standing there. Of course, he just goes, Frodo of the 9 fingers and the ring of doom.
We have brought with us someone who has written a ballad about the adventures of Frodo. The Minstrel of Gondor.
Frodo of the 9 fingers and the ring of doom.
Very vibrato-y, folksy kind of voice.
But Glenn Yarbrough was very famous. He was kind of the lead of the Limelighters, which was a folk music group in the 60s. I think by 1980, probably his fame had tapered off a bit. But it was funny because I started watching this while I was on vacation, and my mother was around, and obviously my mother is a literal boomer, so she grew up in the 60s, and as soon as she heard this, she was like, that's Glenn Yarbrough. So he was quite famous in his era, so getting him to do this music would have been very iconic at the time.
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like there's a connection to modern internet culture that comes from Glenn Yarbrough via another man named Mark Gormley, who was very famous for a very vibrato-y, falsetto-y sort of singing of a song called Little Wings. There was a meme. You could go look up Mark Gormley, Little Wings, but totally takes that vocal style from Glenn Yarbrough, and of course he would, because he probably grew up listening to Glenn, right? Also, rip Mark Gormley, who passed away in May of this year, in fact. So may Little Wings bear him to a far greener pastures than Florida, where he lived. So anyway, the Minstrel of Gondor, and it really is a hilarious start to this movie, right?
Yeah. Because, so let's set up the premise. Let's set up the premise, because if you guys have seen, if you've read Lord of the Rings, if you've seen Lord of the Rings, you may be familiar with the overall story, because the way they frame this though is quite weird. It's not like we are just on the journey with the characters. Where this starts is at Bilbo's 129th birthday party after Return of the King has ended, right? And
in the Grey Havens.
Yes.
Yeah. They're already boated away from Middle Earth and all that.
So they're in Rivendell, right? Where Elrond. Yes, they're in Rivendell, where Elrond. No, they're in Rivendell, where Elrond and the elves are, right? That you probably remember if you've seen the movies or read the books. Except it takes place after the conclusion of the destruction of the One Ring, and Bilbo is giga old and falling asleep constantly, and they are trying to celebrate his birthday while the Minstrel of Gondor sings a ballad about their quest to destroy the One Ring.
And now we all know But alas, look.
Just resting my eyes.
Yeah, it's funny because Bilbo asks Frodo why his finger is gone and why the ring that was on that finger is gone too. And rather than just tell him, Gandalf has brought a minstrel to sing about it. So it's I don't know how Frodo feels about the guy just leading off with like, hey Frodo, you're defining thing about you now is that you're missing a digit. But this is just what we're going with, I guess.
Well, also, like, why wouldn't he have told Bilbo the story about him destroying the One Ring before this moment on his birthday?
Bless my soul, Frodo, you are missing a finger. You not only lost my ring, you lost the finger on which it rode.
I mean, because, Bilbo's got some history with the One Ring as well. He probably didn't want to bring it up, So it'd be awkward, right? Yeah, small Frodo note too. Did you know the original title of this movie was supposed to be The Hobbit 2 Frodo? I'm not even kidding. The original title for this movie was supposed to be The Hobbit 2: Frodo. But they just decided to go through Return of the King in the end.
And if you guys are wondering, like, what happened to the Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers, those movies don't exist. And instead, what we get here is they use the frame narrative of the minstrel to like fast forward you to the point.
I mean,
of
it's kind of
Return
smart,
of the King.
actually.
It actually is smart.
Yeah, unfortunately, it makes the entire movie a musical. But at the same time, fortunately, it makes the entire movie a musical. But it is a smart decision because through music, you can really cover a lot of ground narratively.
Yeah.
Without having it seem awkward, right? Because it's like, okay, what are our options? Flashbacks, like long flashbacks, long exposition from a character where we just watch them talk. No, we will do it through the magic of song. And so that's what they chose. They decided to roll with it. And I think it really works, too. I think it really works.
The power of the ring it grew, and Gandalf sat in thought. He knew that it must be destroyed in fires where it was wrought.
Remember, this was a made-for-TV movie, too. So you had to catch people up.
I love the concept of this Doa, but the problem is the execution is really terrible a lot of the time. And you're just wondering things. You're left wondering things such as, like I said before, why did Frodo not tell Bilbo this? And why was there time to write the entire ballad of their trip before Frodo was like, hey, Bilbo, I destroyed that ring you once had, right?
Well, I mean, if Bilbo was 129, now, here's the first moment where I'll enrage Lord of the Rings fans. So if Bilbo was 129 and he was like 111 when the quest began, according to the Peter Jackson movies, which I'm sure are 100% book accurate, then the quest itself took about a year, if I recall correctly. So Bilbo would have been 112, 113 when the quest ended, right? So that means there was a good 15 plus years for this bard to write it. Really. I mean,
for Frodo not to like meet Bilbo and tell him what happened.
Yeah, exactly. So like this is kind of really this is sort of like if there was a sitcom now made about like 2005 or 2003 about like what happened back then, So it's really like I think it's not so much that Frodo didn't tell him, is that there's just sort of this ring adventure revival kind of going on because every 20 years it kind of happens, And so the Minstrel of Gondor is just kind of riding the wave. He's just riding the ring, the War of the Ring trend. And that's why he wrote it, That's my story anyway. That's my headcanon about this.
So, but the other weird thing about the start of this film, Doa, is that they spend you would think they would get to more of the interesting parts. They spend an inordinate amount of time with Samwise fantasizing about ruling Middle Earth.
Hail Samwise the Strong! Hail the Conqueror! Hail the War King! Hero of the age!
Which also, Doa, because remember that this is the Minstrel of Gondor telling the story. That meant that Samwise went to the Minstrel of Gondor and then told him about his power fantasies and then had him write it into the song.
Well, and Sam is in the room when this is all being sang too. So if this wasn't true, Sam could have protested it. But it's like Sam's sitting there nodding. And it's like, yep, I did imagine all that. Yeah. So you're probably right. You're probably right. But again, I have to say, from the perspective of we didn't get to make the first 2 books, we're just starting from the 3rd book. We have to catch people up a bit. At least that gives us a little bit of insight into Sam as a character, that he's very devoted to Frodo, that like he could, you know, it also tells us about like what the ring can do to people too, I guess, that's important ground to cover at the beginning of this, is like how the ring tempts people.
All could be mine if I but claim the ring.
But Doa,
yeah,
we use all this time on his weird power fantasies where he sits there and imagines himself dominating everybody in Middle Earth. Okay,
I like that he gives himself a flaming sword, by the way, too. If I was having a fantasy about becoming dictator for life in Middle Earth, I'd be like, I am definitely giving myself a flaming sword. He was like, yeah, and then I had a flaming sword, and the army was right behind me, and I was like, go, I'm Samwise the Brave.
But here's the thing, Doa. We are only excusing this because we know the story of Lord of the Rings. So we don't need to be filled in on the background. Imagine coming into this film in the year 1980 and knowing nothing about Lord of the Rings and trying to understand what the fuck is going on in this movie.
Yeah, you're just this average British person sitting at home, turning on like the BBC or whatever you were watching, because I think it was wasn't it all BBC at that point? Wasn't it the only channels they had for like 200 years or something?
It was released on ABC. It's an American film.
No, yeah, but this was released in the UK first though, as a made-for-TV movie. It wasn't it? That's what I read. Anyway, imagine sitting down in front of your TV and watching The Return of the King. Now, you'll probably have your parents sitting there with you if you're a kid being like, oh, so let me tell you the backstory. You know, while the minstrel's singing, they're like, don't listen to any of the Sam stuff. So there's probably a lot of people sitting with other people explaining what really happened, you know? So you've got that. But for those people who didn't know, they just, you know, get these songs, right? And I think it works on a basic level of covering the ground you need to cover, but for all of us who know how much stuff happens in Return of the King and all that, it seems like, why are we spending 15 minutes on this Sam flashback or this Sam fantasy when we could be doing actual book stuff? So, you know, again, I get why they did it, but if you already know what's up, then it seems like a big diversion when you can't afford the time for diversion, you know?
I mean, Doa, the reason you know that this is an American production is, first off, like, Rankin Bass was American, right? They were based in New York.
Of course.
And then secondly, just listen to the actors in this film. I think one of the most hilarious. I want to like John Huston, by the way, is Gandalf, which honestly is kind of a great casting decision. And clearly this came out first, but hearing John Huston in an American accent compared to Ian McKellen is like quite jarring, you know, if you've seen both films.
When the gates break, I shall be there to greet it. Have my steed Shadowfax made ready. Farewell, Pippin.
I go with you, sir.
Then we leave this life together. Come, little one.
And John Huston, I mean, great director, great actor, right? We've actually done a couple John Huston films on 4Play already, which you guys can check out. Did The Maltese Falcon, which he directed, and then he was one of the supporting stars of Chinatown, which we also did. And he's spectacular director, spectacular actor, you know, really wonderful, you know, celebrated Hollywood legend. But it is, his voice is really good for Gandalf. But then we get a bunch of other American actors, some of which are doing really, really bad British accents or like attempts at Cockney accents in this film. And then John Huston just doesn't even try. He's just American Gandalf, which is charming,
Where'd I get the British thing from? I don't know. We'll have to edit that out. Edit that out, or else. I don't know. I read a lot of things, and apparently I read that one wrong. It's never happened before. It's the first time I've ever gotten anything wrong in my entire career. I don't know how to handle this. It's very strange.
But anyway, moving back to the actual animation, I think you should bring up again the Frodo of the Nine Fingers, and we should talk about the actual music in this because it is hilarious. The lyrics are hilarious.
Easy not to try.
It's so easy not to try. Let the world go drifting by.
I wonder when they were composing this, why they just focused on Frodo having 9 fingers as like the key defining aspect that they're going to just repeat over and over and over and over again throughout this film.
Poor Frodo. Even at the very end when he's wrestling with Gollum, it comes on like a very dramatic sense. He goes, "Why does he have 9 fingers?" I'm like, we're about to see it. We're about to see his finger get bit off. Like, we get it. We get it. Everyone's really curious about where his finger went. But like,
Why does he have 9 fingers?
I'm pretty sure there's other things that you could sing about.
It just doesn't sound very epic. It's like he went on this epic quest and all he lost was a finger. I'm pretty sure he's pretty happy with that result. If I was Frodo and the only thing I lost was a finger on my quest to destroy the One Ring, I'd be thrilled, man. This is a great outcome for Frodo.
People died. People in Middle Earth died. Like thousands of people died. And Frodo lost a finger.
Didn't lose both his legs, just one finger.
Well, I mean, it would have been really crass if the bard would have been like, "Frodo of the no legs." Like that's just, that's even more mean. But yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, like, if you watch that scene too, and he starts singing Frodo of the Nine Fingers, the looks on all the hobbits' face, they actually animated how they probably look in real life, where everyone just kind of is like, just has this sort of like this pause and this sort of this stunned look, except for Sam, who like looks over with a grin at Frodo, like, isn't this great? Which sounds like a Sam kind of thing to do, But everyone else is just like, why did Gandalf bring this guy? Gandalf's never getting a +1 at one of Bilbo's parties again.
So Doa, also, we would be remiss if we were talking about the music and we didn't mention the epic song "Where There's a Whip, There's a Way." Because remember, guys, this film was actually made in the 1970s. Sure, it came out in May of 1980, but they were still deep in the disco, as it were. And, they could have just gone, Doa, with a theme of folk music, but no, they had to include a very funky disco bass line in the marching to war song, "Where There's a Whip, There's a Way," where the orcs are lamenting the fact that they are getting brutally whipped to go to war against their will for the Dark Lord.
This is how you reach the youth. Yeah. This is how you get the
It was a
teens
protest
interested.
song like Vietnam, about Vietnam.
There's a way. We don't want to go to war today, but the Lord of the Lash says nay, nay, nay. That is actually how the song goes. And there's like a disco beat.
Where there's a whip, we don't want to go to war today. But the Lord of the Lash says, nay, nay, nay. We're gonna march all day, all day, all day.
So now, and
the whip cracking on the beat, of course.
Yeah, I thought that we were done with fantasy disco songs after Hawk the Slayer. I thought we had reached peak disco fantasy. And I was wrong. Even in the Lord of the Rings, even in the I keep saying Lord of the Rings, even in the Return of the King animated film, we still got some disco. So I don't know, when does the disco end? Is kind of my question for the rest of this series, the rest of this 80s fantasy series. When does the disco end?
Well, because probably later in the 80s is the answer, when disco fell out, because it's just going to turn into, this is just going to turn into hair metal later on, right? Well, we're all aware that the hair metal is coming.
There's literally a movie called Heavy Metal that we're probably going to cover.
It's in 1981.
So,
yep.
Yeah. So that is very self-explanatory. But that doesn't mean there can't be a little bit of disco in there, you know? I'm sure we're going to still find a little bit of disco sneaking into some of these movies. You never know. Why don't we use disco in modern fantasy? Never mind. But you know, the thing that struck me more than anything with this movie, just in general, is that it felt like a radio play, you know, with the way that a lot of the dialogue was very, very descriptive, the use of song and all that kind of stuff. It felt like a radio play where it's like, at one point in the movie, I was like, I could just close my eyes and listen to this. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't miss anything, you know, because they're just stating everything that's happening. They're stating the visual part of everything that's happening. And this was an era too where there was still a lot of radio plays, right, happening. That was obviously very popular before the time of television, but even after that, there was still a good amount of radio plays. There were famous radio plays of The Lord of the Rings, in fact. And this kind of reminded me of sort of like a hybrid of that, right? Where it's descriptive enough to just listen to, but you've got this visual aspect of it too. And it's supposed to be, you know, more visual medium, but it's still kind of writing wise falls into a very radio play kind of flow, in my opinion. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Not as interesting as Disco Orcs, maybe, but still interesting. Yeah.
The casting of this also, you know, isn't bad. There's a lot of pretty famous actors in here. Roddy McDowall is Sam in this. He's not good as Sam, I have to say. But I do like Roddy McDowall. And if you guys remember, again, another actor who appears in a 4-play episode that we did on Fright Night, the 1980s vampire movie, where he's just wonderful in that movie. But longtime Hollywood legend. Casey Kasem, who is a super famous like DJ and also DJ, was Shaggy in Scooby-Doo. He's in this. That's Barry. Like they got a lot of famous voice actors and famous actors. Yeah.
Paul Frees does a lot of voices in this. He was Daffy Duck, and he was a ton of.
He was
other
in
voices.
Rocky and Bullwinkle as Boris. Yeah. So they got really famous voice actors for this, guys.
Yeah. It was a big, fairly, you know, big budget for its time foreign animated feature production. It seems like, you know. And so you can't say they didn't try, despite that song that they keep playing that just says it's so easy not to try. I think they tried when they made this.
Still, Sam, we shall have to try.
It's so easy not to try.
Yeah, and everything is super rushed, guys. Like, again, if you weren't familiar with Lord of the Rings, you would be like, why is Aragorn just suddenly appearing and then he's just king? Because there's no backstory that's actually told for Aragorn in this whatsoever, because we don't get the first 2 films. He just rocks up to Gondor and returns, right? You also just get the Rohirrim just randomly showing up again at Gondor. There's no who you know, what is Rohan? Who are these people who are coming? Nah, they just show up. They just show up.
Yeah.
Right now to Gondor.
You don't need to worry about that stuff. It's the Rohan showing up is such an epic moment in the Peter Jackson films, and in this they just sort of appear, like you said, and then Theoden just kind of falls off his horse and dies. Like there's no combat or anything. He's just like, oh, and he falls off.
Fear no darkness, snowmen. No snowmen, no.
And when then, you know, the Witch King shows up, and it's like basically invisible Skeletor. It has a Skeletor voice. It's like, yeah, I'm the Witch King. Yeah, where's He-Man? I'm in the wrong show. And I don't know why they had to do this voice.
Dost thou not know the prophecy? No living man may hinder me.
But no living man am I. You look upon a woman. Eowyn am I. You stand between me and my lord and kin.
It's a very 80s cartoon villain voice because it sounds exactly like Skeletor from He-Man. But that's what they decided to go with. Yeah. And then Eowyn, shoots him with a laser from her sword. We can't have anybody cutting each other in this sword and sorcery flick. No. We gotta shoot lasers, I guess. But yeah.
And then you get the.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say. Then you get the classic scene of Frodo and Gollum just wrestling over the ring, and it accidentally ending up in Mount Doom, right? And that's where we figure out why he's Frodo of the Nine Fingers.
The bearer of the ring, the wearer of the ring. It's like you're saying the same thing twice. Like, I get it.
It's very look. The music's very memorable. The music's very memorable. Credit to them. Like the music itself is not bad. It is exactly what it is supposed to be. It just happens to be of a genre that isn't popular any longer.
You know, the worst thing about this movie is that it's mostly just Frodo and Sam walking around, which is objectively the worst parts of Lord of the Rings. But yet it is most of this movie. And sure, Frodo and Sam, they're main characters. Frodo is arguably the main character, despite the title being The Return of the King. But, if you're going to do Lord of the Rings in a visual medium, you need to do more than just the two hobbits walking around, So that was the thing that bothered me the most about this. It was too much Frodo and Sam. The worst parts of Lord of the Rings. There's my way to infuriate Lord of the Rings fans, number 2. Well, how about... Oh, okay. Well, anyway. What do you think about Gollum's nether region?
What do you think about them?
I wanted to ask that seriously.
What do you think about Gollum's peen?
In the Peter Jackson films, because Gollum's, he's been around for hundreds of years. He's very old and withered and decrepit, and all that. And so it's like, how do you handle his private parts? It's a good question. It's a good question visually, right? And in the Peter Jackson films, he just had a little loincloth. It's like, yeah, sure. I mean, he's wretched, but at least he still has a little bit of dignity. In this, there's just hair. It's just I mean, he's completely hairless except for right there, and I gotta say, it is a little bit distracting.
He just shaves every other part of his body.
I guess so. Work with what you got. And if you don't have clothes and that's working for you, I just wanted your opinion on that.
And then the film ends after, we see the escape of Sam and Frodo, and it fast forwards back to the present day, and poor senile Bilbo, they just decide, hey, we're just gonna peace out and go across the ocean now.
On a white ship will I sail, watching shadows part for me.
Did you notice something about the eagle rescue? I noticed something. Is that they left all the horses. All those horses that bravely carried them into battle. It's like, get wrecked, noobs. Enjoy the volcano. Because the eagles come down, it picks all the people off of the horses, and it's just like, well, you're screwed.
Goodbye, my loyal steed.
That's right. I couldn't grip you hard enough with my thighs and carry you with me. So it's not me, it's the eagles. Sorry. They just leave all the horses. Yeah. Because in this, we should explain too, it's in the Peter Jackson films, which I think people are most familiar with now, Lord of the Rings wise, the eagles just save Sam and Frodo, right? In this movie, they save everybody. They save Aragorn and the whole army that marches to the gates of Mordor and hangs out there for a little bit. So they come down, they pick them up and they just leave all the horses. I mean, the riders of Rohirrim, I guess they're just like the power walkers of Rohirrim from now on. What happened to all your horses?
Eagle riders of Rohirrim.
Yeah, I guess that's way cooler, actually. That's an upgrade. That's an upgrade, in my opinion. Yeah.
And then we just see them leaving at the end. They just, Gandalf, Bilbo, Frodo, and Elrond just like take off on the boat. Again, if you didn't know what was going on from being a fan of Lord of the Rings in previous iterations, I have no idea how you would take this ending because it's abrupt. It's very abrupt.
You're missing the very best part of the ending, though, where the very best part of this entire movie, perhaps, is at the end, where Gandalf is talking about that the elves and dwarves and stuff will leave Middle-earth, but the hobbits will remain, and eventually just become people. And he explains how the younger hobbits are all taller than the older hobbits, and he goes like, well, if you really take care of the Book of Frodo, some people are gonna be reading it someday, and then they'll be like, is there any hobbit in me? And then it does a close, quick zoom on the Gandalf's face, and he looks right into the camera and he goes, is there?
And if you keep the Book of the Hobbits, as Frodo asked, ages from now, when your stories are still told, there'll be those humans who might well wonder, is there hobbit in me? Is there?
And so everyone at home simultaneously across the nation went, there might be hobbit in me. Is there hobbit in me?
You know,
That's
one of those things like with 23andMe and the DNA testing is they tell you like how much Neanderthal DNA is actually in you.
That's what it is. That's hobbit.
So, the Neanderthal is the hobbit. I was going to say that, you know, now we can actually just test for hobbit DNA in us. I have 0%. Turns out.
I'm convinced that I also apparently have 0 Neanderthal DNA, but I'm going to pretend it was hobbit DNA, and I'm going to be a little bit sad that there is no hobbit in me. Is there? No, there's not. Sorry, Gandalf. The answer is no. There's no hobbit in me. It's kind of sad. This movie did make the good decision too that the Peter Jackson films made, and they skipped the Scourging of the Shire entirely. That's easy in this because Saruman wasn't in the Return of the King other than the Scourging of the Shire. So if you didn't do a movie of the first 2 books, you can just pretend he doesn't exist, which is exactly what this movie did. Saruman just doesn't exist in the Rankin Bass Lord of the Rings universe. So they skipped that, which is also a great decision in the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films. But I noticed that. I was like, are they going to do that? Because like Saruman hasn't, and then they didn't. I'm like, okay, that's good. Yeah, good decision.
I'm going to talk about Arthur Rankin, who is obviously one of the leads at Rankin Bass, one of the owners of the company, and his take on this film, because I think it's very funny as we think about how we would critically evaluate this. But first, Noah, got to talk about our other sponsor on the show. That is Mando. Shout out to Mando. Thank you very much. If you guys aren't aware, Mando is a company that does soaps and deodorants for men. And I've been enjoying it myself. This is actually the cream deodorant, which I had not used before, but it rubs into wherever you do not want to have body odor. So armpits, feet, your Gollum parts.
I was going to say your Gollum areas.
Your Gollum area, your hairy Gollum area. But yeah, it's been really great. I've been enjoying using it. I've actually liked the cream deodorant way more than I thought I would when I first started trying it out. So I'm really glad that I was able to give it a shot. So Mando's great. It is not an antiperspirant, so it is aluminum-free, baking soda-free, cruelty-free, dye-free, and vegan. So it's all of the above. And it really does help prevent body odor before it starts. And it does this because it has mandelic acid in it instead of other things. And it has, I think, some nice scents. This is the bourbon leather. I've been really enjoying that one. Yeah.
I like the bourbon. I use the bourbon leather body wash. I do like the bourbon leather scent as well. And I'll admit, I'm not the smelliest person ever. Thank you, Scandinavian DNA. But everybody needs a little bit, and I do like their aromas. Yeah.
There you go. They also have Clover Woods, Mount Fuji Pro Sport. They even have unscented, if that's your thing. And if you guys want to give it a try, you can try their starter pack because it's perfect for new customers. You get a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant like this one right here, and then 2 free products of your choice like a mini body wash or the deodorant wipes, and free shipping. By the way, low-key, the deodorant wipes are amazing, especially if you're going camping or you've been out sweating for the day. It's a really good way to feel refreshed, and I've been stinky when I've used some of those sometimes, and it just clears it up immediately. So actually, that's a product that I've been really enjoying as well. And we do have a discount code to help you get hooked on our favorite smelling whole body deodorant on the market. New customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code. That equates to over 40% off your starter pack. Remember, you also get free shipping. Use code NERD at shopmando.com, shopmando.com. And as usual, guys, here on Last Free Nation, supporting our sponsors is, in fact, the best way to support the show. So if you enjoy Nerd Legion, go try some of this stuff out. We use these products ourselves, guys. It's no BS. So I'm a big fan. I've been enjoying Mando. So Arthur Rankin,
Yes.
he admitted that this was not a very good movie because they only had like an hour and a half to put together all of Lord of the Rings. And when he was asked in an interview why he chose to only make Return of the King instead of making all of Lord of the Rings as 3 different movies, he said, I didn't know that the audience would sit still for it. I was wrong, because this was after, obviously, the Peter Jackson movies came out, which isn't unreasonable to ask, why didn't you make this epic fantasy trilogy? Because nobody knew even that Peter Jackson's movies, which are excellent, obviously, especially the extended versions, would be so popular. But they are, and they're still really good, and they're held in high regard. The Hobbit movies are terrible, but the original Lord of the Rings, great. So I do think I understand why he would believe that there wasn't, potentially an appetite or an audience for this, but it turned out, fortunately for us, that there was.
Yeah. And, it's funny because, like I mentioned earlier, there's been so many different versions of the Lord of the Rings that have been made via radio, TV, film, all that kind of stuff. And so it's really interesting to go back and look at sort of everybody's version of it, because they're always a little bit different. People always choose to tell the story in a little bit different way. And so regardless of the individual quality of the piece, it's always interesting to see somebody else's take on it, So this was really fun to watch from that perspective too, where it's like you get to see somebody else's vision of that. We got that recently with Dune, right? So it was neat to see that with Lord of the Rings too, after, being a big fan of the Peter Jackson trilogy. And I kind of have to tell my little Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings story too, where I had read The Hobbit as a kid, but I hadn't read the Lord of the Rings books. I didn't know anything at all about the story. I watched the trailer for Fellowship of the Ring once, and then I went in the movie pretty much cold. I didn't know Saruman was going to be a bad guy. I didn't know who lived and who died. I had no idea Shelob was a giant spider when it got to that point. I refused to watch any trailers after the first one and do anything with that. So I got to see the entire Peter Jackson trilogy knowing absolutely nothing about Lord of the Rings. And it is still like the best movie experience of my entire life, because there are like significant twists and things like that they really hit hard if you don't know they're coming, know. And so I feel I was fortunate to be able to go into it that way. And I've read the books multiple times since then, and just to see what those were like. But man, that first Peter Jackson movie experience was just, I will never forget watching those movies in the theater. That was so excellent.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was huge. I loved seeing them in the theater when they came out. Obviously, we're both nerds. That's why we do the show Nerd Legion. So it was huge in the early 2000s to be watching one of those films a year, highly anticipated. Wonderful. I will say, though, I did get a kick out of the TikTok drama that I created by saying that Tolkien was a bad writer, because on our LFN culture TikTok, people got big mad about that. Because and honestly, Tolkien, I clarified this clearly, and people just willfully misunderstand me. I don't mean that he created a bad world. He was a linguist. He created an incredibly in-depth world. The story is good. Where Tolkien falls down is he's just bad at the mechanics of writing novels. Right? Which is why when the story is told in the Peter Jackson films, I think the films are a superior rendition of the tale of Lord of the Rings compared to the actual book. The Two Towers is no joke. One of the worst books I have ever read from a pure enjoyment perspective, because he doesn't even know how to interweave narratives. It's literally half of the book is just Frodo and Sam walking through Mordor, which is horribly boring, and then it just
sure.
You have to understand that the book just rewinds and then starts with the narrative of the other characters, right? There isn't any kind of interweaving of here's a chapter of what's happening at this time, and then here are what the other characters are doing. It's literally just half and half of that book. And this Frodo and Sam half is bad. It's bad.
Well, so on that note, I want to set a little challenge for us. Because it seems like no matter what we do, we're going to make somebody angry with what we say. It's the nature of, being critical of something. It just comes with the territory. But I challenge us to, in one sentence, see which one of us can make the Lord of the Rings fan base angrier. Because they are a notoriously touchy fan base, as we know from the many, many years of internet comments, decades at this point. about various Lord of the Rings material. So I think I found a sentence that will anger the most Lord of the Rings fans of every type. So I'll try mine, and then you try to come up with one yourself, okay? All right. So my here's what I think. I think the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy is the best telling of the Lord of the Rings story ever. But I think the Rankin Bass Hobbit cartoon is the best telling of the Hobbit story ever. Certainly better than
That's interesting. That's a hot take. I like it. So why do you think that this is the best telling of the Hobbit story?
Oh, you want to talk about Hobbit specifically? We've already talked about the Peter Jackson one. So for Lord of the Rings and all that. Well, obviously the Peter Jackson Hobbit movies were big and bloated and terrible. They're big, stuffy CG nightmare with all this, we didn't need to bring Legolas back, blah, blah, blah. You could go on and on about how those movies did not work out. And I feel bad for him because, obviously he didn't want that to be part of his legacy. It just it got studioed to death, But the Rankin Bass cartoon is another just adorable musical adventure. Right, we get a song that it's like the greatest adventure. It's like a very famous song from that era. It's gone beyond that film, right? But I think they also did a lot of smart things too. Their handling of Tom Bombadil, things like that. But again, I think they just had a nice little concise version of The Hobbit. And while the book is good, I think to a lesser extent it suffers from a lot of the same things the Lord of the Rings trilogy does. And I think the animated film does it better.
Well, also, I think just in terms of animation, because The Hobbit is more of a children's story at the end of the day, than Lord of the Rings is significantly darker than The Hobbit. It's significantly more complex. The Hobbit is a very straightforward story.
It is a kid's story, yeah.
I also, in terms of Tolkien, I prefer reading The Hobbit to reading Lord of the Rings because I think he writes The Hobbit better, right? But I agree with you. And it's not him struggling with characters in different locations, like in the Two Towers, and how to handle that.
He had a concise story.
Constructing.
He knew what he wanted to tell, and he was able to tell it. And whereas it seems like Lord of the Rings just kind of went on and on. So where do I go from here? Where do I go from here? So yeah, agreed there.
Right. At the end of the day, my hot take is Tolkien is a sick dungeon master, but he's not a good novelist.
Yeah,
I can put it that way. I
think you're absolutely right. A lot of people out there are like, "Oh man, let me tell you about my campaign setting. It's so sick." And then they try to write a novel and it's awful. And it's because people get way too hung up on world building. Like you can make the coolest world in the world, but if you don't have cool characters and cool development of those characters and a cool story around them to put in that world, then it doesn't matter. Your world can be the neatest thing ever created and nobody's going to remember it because you didn't have a good story to put in it. And so, yeah, I think that trap is something that a lot of dungeon masters can fall into. Sometimes go on to try to be fantasy writers. But yeah, I think Lord of the Rings had a little bit of that too, where it's great world, great core story, but just poor execution,
So yeah, I do think if The Hobbit is also the cartoon is just the better version of this, but this has disco orc songs, so I don't know. I really enjoyed it.
There's a way.
It's just like Hawk the Slayer, man. I don't regret spending my time watching this, like some of the TV shows that we've watched. Secret Invasion. I regret using hours of my life on that show. It was bad. Yeah. This is also kind of bad, but it's fun. It's fun bad, which is where we're getting with all of these 1980s films. So very enjoyable. I would watch it, guys. At least watch some of the songs in their entirety. Like you can find Where There's a Whip, There's a Way on YouTube and watch the whole thing. I'm sure you guys got a taste of it through the edits in here as well. But also, we are going to proceed. Now, we're done with 1980, Doa, because there were only these two films in 1980. And we are going to do one more before we dive into probably some newer releases, guys. But I have to say, Doa, 1981 is a banger. And you guys are going to know a lot of these films that were released in 1981, because this is where we saw a lot of bigger budget of sword and sorcery films. So we are going to do the 1981 Clash of the Titans, not the 2010 remake, guys, the original Clash of the Titans, but also released in this year. Time Bandits, which we've already done. So check out our Time Bandits episode. We won't be doing a new one on that. But here are the other three films that were released in 1981. Excalibur, heavy metal, and Dragon Slayer. Okay, so
Sick.
you probably have seen some of these films, and there are some like legit big budget, very successful bangers. It's not like Hawk the Slayer, which was a $600,000 B movie. I mean, these are big budget films that were coming in that, you know, have major actors in them. I mean, Excalibur has young Liam Neeson, young Patrick Stewart, young Gabriel Byrne. Not going to say young Helen Mirren, but Helen Mirren.
Young at heart.
Clash of the Titans obviously has Laurence Olivier, one of the principal actors of his generation, right? So lots of good stuff. Ian McDiarmid, who was Emperor Palpatine, he's in Dragon Slayer.
And then he just decided he just needed to play the Emperor for the rest of the time, and I don't think that's a bad decision.
John Candy is in Heavy Metal.
John Candy's in Heavy Metal?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Is he rotoscoped, or is he just a voice for something?
But these are very famous films. Probably, I mean, you consider probably Excalibur and Clash of the Titans maybe the most, you know, alongside Conan the Barbarian, probably the most famous film. And Legend, I guess. There's a lot of famous films. Yeah.
Willow.
Some of the most famous. So Dark Crystal, obviously, we're coming up on too. So we will get back into the B movies, but we're going to plow through some of these like larger budget Hollywood films that are quite fun. So we'll start with Clash of the Titans, and then we will work our way through the rest of those. Probably at a bit of a delay, like I said at the start of the episode, we have a lot of other content that's going to be coming up for you guys, and a lot of kind of interesting modern releases that we will see over the next few months, major ones, Star Wars ones, Dune ones, and then Uzumaki also. So guys can look forward to that, and we will catch you next episode.